Okay, I want to give you a little perspectives of how I deal with color in Photoshop and Lightroom and different color spaces. This came out of a thread that Joel was talking about converting his images to sRGB and things from ProPhoto and making them look. They made them look funny. So Photoshop deals with an absolute pile of color spaces. Like if you look, you can create a full custom RGB. You got Monitor RGB, Adobe RGB, ProPhoto RGB, sRGB, Aries, DCDMs, Fujifilms, Kodaks, B3s, and just an absolute freaking pile of color spaces. Okay. Thankfully, in photography, we don't have to worry too much about most of these. We only have to deal with a small subset of them. So if we go into here and let's crop this image down, these are really the ones we have to deal with. Once in a while, you'll see Adobe RGB and Apple RGB, okay? And those mostly come up in discussions, or Adobe RGB will come up from time to time as a color space that you can use. However, for generating prints, 99% of the labs I've ever dealt with deal with sRGB. And if they're not sRGB, they are CMYK, and that's a whole nother discussion because that's prints and ICC profiles. It expands this list to God knows how many options. And the other one that you always hear about is ProPhoto. That is the most extensive, the smoothest gradient between colors and things like that. It holds the most colors available, even more a wider gamut of colors than is capable of being displayed on your monitor. sRGB is the most common one because that's anything to do with web and stuff like that. ProPhoto RGB is how Lightroom runs, for example. So how do we deal with these when it comes into Photoshop? Well, I've got two images here. I've set up some, they're both exactly the same image. One is a sRGB and one is a ProPhoto RGB. So I go into color settings. I've set up two things, and I'll discuss all of these operations once we get into it. So we got sRGB defaults. So what it's going to do is default to sRGB. So now if I go open an sRGB image, you would expect it to look right? And it looks great. Okay, so that image is an sRGB image, so it's profiled to sRGB. How can I tell? Well, if you look down here in the lower left-hand corner, we've got these, click on that little caret, and there's document sizes. There's also document profile. This is what I typically keep it on, but you can bounce it back and forth. You can use it to check things, whatever, because there's a whole bunch of other things under here that are useful pieces of information, whether it's, smart objects, your layer counts, all these different things. The two that I use the most are obviously the size and the color profiles. So this tells you this is an sRGB image. Let's go in and open the actual ProPhoto RGB image. I told you this was ProPhoto. This was saved with a ProPhoto color space, okay? And I'm opening it with an sRGB active. It will tell me, okay, if you have hit don't show again, you won't see this. It'll just come up and give you a horrific looking image. Looks like crap, okay? Because what it does is it maps the colors. It says, well, color 1 pertains to color 1, color 3924 corresponds to color 3924, and the mapping isn't accurate. It looks terrible, okay? This is what happens when you take a ProPhoto image into an sRGB color space. It's not converting it, it's just mapping it. Okay, there's a difference there. So, and you can see here it's got an untagged RGB because it doesn't know what to do. So it does what it can and brings the image in. Looks terrible in retrospect, okay? So let's close all these down. And let's go change our color space. Color settings. I'm going to change this to ProPhoto RGB, okay, as my default. So we'll go in here, and I'm going to open up the ProPhoto PNG. Remember, I didn't save it, so the ugly colors don't come back. Okay, looks good, looks great. In fact, it tells me right down here, ProPhoto RGB, 16-bit, looks good to me. Okay, so now if I go and open up that sRGB image, what happens if I load an sRGB image? And it tells me again, if I have hit this don't show again, this will not show up. It's going to map the sRGB into a ProPhoto color space. And that looks equally as bad, but in the opposite direction. It's not muted nasty colors. Now it's like this ultra overblown, ultra saturated kind of thing. So same thing. It's mapping. It's not converting. Okay. So how do we fix this problem? Well, there is a whole bunch of ways to do this. The way that I make changes here is I will go into this operation and go underneath my color settings. Okay, and I have something that I call Lightroom interface. Okay, and what it says is by default it wants to work in ProPhoto RGB. And color management policies, these are the important ones. I'll back up before we get to there. Let's go to CMYK, gray, and spot. You can leave these defaulted. The only time you'll have to deal with these is if you're dealing with a professional printing lab, and they'll essentially tell you or give you profiles that you need to use. Okay, down to color management policies. I leave it on preserve embedded profiles because that says do not change the color space of the image. Just pull it in, let's see what it does. And then you can see down here, there's a bunch of switches. Profile mismatches, ask me when opening, or ask when pasting. So if you're moving from a sRGB image into a ProPhoto space, it'll ask you what you want to do, and then missing profiles, ask what to do when opening the image. Okay, so this is what I save as my Lightroom interface, and I use this as my Photoshop defaults. So if I open a ProPhoto image, okay, remember ProPhoto is my default color space. So it says, okay, I know what to do with this. It's a ProPhoto image, so I'm going to open it. Now, let's go back and open the sRGB image. If I open the sRGB image, it says, hey, whoa, wait a minute, we got an embedded profile mismatch. This is the important thing. That's what those switches do at the bottom. It says, use the embedded profile instead of the working space. Convert the document's colors or discard the embedded profile. So what you can do is you can say, convert the colors, and this will automatically convert the sRGB into ProPhoto. And remember, converting is different than mapping. Okay, so it actually knows where the colors belong. If you use the embedded profile, I'm going to use that, and I open it up. Looks just fine. Okay, down at the bottom you see my color space is 8-bit sRGB. Looks good. Okay, now let's go in. I'm going to close this one down, and I'm going to use that second option and say, what do I want to do? Well, I want to go in and open that image. Whoops, sorry, I'm navigating around a little bit. Open that sRGB one, and I'm going to say convert documents colors to the working space. So let's convert it, and hit OK. And look, hey, looks great. So it knows what, like for example, this orange on her strap. It knows what that orange, it knows where that space is in sRGB, it knows where that same color is on ProPhoto, so it copies it and says, hey, look, now if you look down at your color space, it's no longer sRGB. It has converted it into ProPhoto. So that's the biggest difference, that's the biggest tip difference that I can give you, is to go in and set your color settings appropriately and use these settings. ProPhoto, well, I use this. You can use sRGB or ProPhoto, either one. But then the big important thing is this preserve embedded, and then turn on all these switches. That will give you the options to convert, because then you don't get the default mapping differentials between the images. Okay, so that's how you can fix a lot of these problems. One other thing, let's do close all here. I'm going to open this ProPhoto image, and there's another switch here. If I go under Edit and your color settings are here, you've got Assign Profiles and Convert to Profile. Assign Profile is very, very different than Convert to Profile. Assign Profile is that mapping that I was talking about. The conversion actually does a conversion, so you can say, well, I want to convert, here's my source space, ProPhoto. I want to convert to sRGB. So if I say OK, you'll notice, bang, it turns into sRGB. Looks great, okay? Now, if for some reason I want to use the Assign Profile, and this is what a lot of people do, they go to Assign Profile, and then assign this profile to, let's assign this to ProPhoto, for example. What do you think is going to happen? Hey, it looks like that crappy Dayglow neon, pastel kind of image that we had initially. So I did nothing other than just map it, okay? So assigning is the same as mapping, and you do not want to do that. So in fact, I don't ever touch this Assign Profile unless for some reason it's something that I know it's a sRGB and it comes in as a unnamed profile or things like that. Okay, so that's how Photoshop deals with it. Now let's go into Lightroom and do the same thing and understand better how Lightroom deals with it. Okay, in Lightroom I've got this image, and go into the Develop module and look at this. This is a ProPhoto color space image. So if I want to look at this, Lightroom by default works in ProPhoto color space, so it looks perfect. But now if I press the S key on my keyboard to get to soft proofing, you'll see I can soft proof in a number of different profiles. Like up in the top right hand corner, you'll see I've got sRGB, Display P3, Adobe RGB, and the only one I ever use is sRGB. And there's a bunch of others you can add. You can include display profiles, and if you have a printer that gives you an ICC profile, you can put it in here, so you can check and see what looks good and what doesn't. With the sRGB and other color, like raw color profiles, there's no difference between perceptual and relative. Okay, with print images, they have a perceptual and a relative scale, so things might look a little bit different if you use perceptual versus relative. So as you can see here, top right hand corner, just like the clipping indicators on the regular histogram, we've got hide and show destination gamut warnings, and we've also got monitor gamut warnings. In this case, mine, it just doesn't like it, and I don't know why, because my laptop's pretty good. Now, what you can see is the places that are red, okay, these highlight clippings, looks like highlight clippings. In this case, it's an sRGB perceptual clipping. These will not, our sRGB can't fulfill these colors. So it's like the brights of this orange on her strap, and some of the darks in her nose and behind her ear, inside her ear, things like that. So really the only way that you can deal with this is to go into the HSL panel and start dealing with the saturation. So we'll go into the saturation. I'm going to grab hold of this strap, and I'm just going to simply pull down until I start to see these red clippings go away. So I'll go pretty close, and I'll just make this my proof copy. Don't worry about it. That's nothing you really need to worry about. In here, you can see I got a little clip in her nose and a little clip in her ear. But other than that, the image looks pretty good. Okay, so now my clipping's gone away. Let's get out of soft proofing. Okay, that's my image. Now the problem is it's desaturated my oranges and my reds, so now my skin tones look different. Okay, let's pop over. I got one more image, and I've got the sRGB image that was exported out of Lightroom. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so we'll go over to here. Whoops, wrong one, wrong key. There it is right there. Now let's press the C key to compare, and we can see you can see here on the left, this is the sRGB that was exported from Lightroom. On the right is the ProPhoto sRGB perceptual that I just worked on. So I desaturated. This looks okay. This looks better. Her skin tones look better. I like her skin tones better on the left. They're richer. They're smoother looking. They're not smoother looking. There's a lot more like oomph to them, I guess is the way I would describe it. On the right, there's things about it I like. There's things that I don't. It's kind of washed her out a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of the one on the right, but they both, because I'm not sure why Lightroom goes into soft proofing and allows you or forces you to desaturate in order to match the color space when it exports and makes the exact same image inside that color space. It makes no sense to me. So let's go back into my perceptual one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut off this. So this is the baseline ProPhoto image. Okay, I shut off the HSL adjustments that I did. So now if I press the C key again, you can see here's my ProPhoto straight out of the box. I know it's the one that I soft proofed because of this sRGB perceptual thing on it, but it looks almost identical to the sRGB image. The skin, like maybe on her neck down here, is a little punchier on the sRGB image, but other than that, they look pretty damn close to the same. So to be honest with you, if you're working in Lightroom, the only thing I'll tell you is export as sRGB. So if you go in to develop module, and I'm going to press Command or Control and Shift and E, okay, and then you've got all these options here depending on what export options you use. You can export as a PNG with sRGB or ProPhoto. If you do sRGB, the images will look good. You can use 8-bit, 16-bit. If you're using JPEG, it's going to be 8-bit, which is 90. This is because it's set to PNG. So if I use sRGB, it automatically goes to 8-bit with a JPEG. I can set my quality up high, whatever I want to do. All the same kind of things that you have to worry about getting to a printer. It will convert to sRGB, and it will look almost identical to the ProPhoto image. So I don't ever worry about color spaces when I deal with just Lightroom. When I'm going from Lightroom to Photoshop, or Photoshop to Photoshop, or image to image in Photoshop, or opening an image base from the operating system into Photoshop, then you need to be worried about it. But I already showed you how to deal with all those color spaces inside of Photoshop. Hopefully this makes sense and clarifies a lot of issues. If you got any questions, I'll try to answer them the best as I can. I'm by no means an expert, but I've got some exposure to it.